Hello, friends. My name is Arup Dasgupta, and I joined ISRO in the year 1970. As you know, ISRO was formed in 1969, so I'm one of those very early recruits. I worked in ISRO all the time, 34 years, and I worked in the same center of ISRO, which is the Space Application Center. Of course, when I joined ISRO, there was no Space Application Center. It was Electronic Systems Division, and the project which I was selected for was the Satellite Instruction Television Experiment, which was just about to take off. The agreement with NASA had been signed sometime in, I think, September '69. So I was one of the first few recruits for the project. Uh, I'm basically a city bred person, and even my parents were born and brought up in small towns. So I had no experience at all of the rural setting. And it so happened that I happened to be selected for a project, and in fact, subsequent projects where all my work was in the rural areas. So, as in the course of my work, I have moved through every nook and cranny of a country, either on the site experiment work or later on in my work on remote sensing and geographic information systems. So, uh, there are many stories to tell, I guess, but maybe a few of them I can just recount. And, the first was, of course, my travels within rural India. Maybe I should tell you a little story of how I went to a place called Baudh Khondmals. Baudh Khondmals is located in Odisha, and right now it is rather infamous for its Naxalite connection. But in those days, I'm talking of 1974, things were not that bad. But then the question was how to reach there. So nobody could tell us how to reach there. So Professor Chitnis, who was at that time handling the site project, handed me 5,000 rupees and said, Dasgupta, reach whichever way you want. You walk, fly, swim, whatever, but you reach there. Now, 5,000 rupees in those days was quite a lot because salary was about 700 rupees. So, and there were no credit cards and things like that. So, I just pocketed the 5,000 rupees and proceeded to discuss with my colleagues how to reach there. We are four of us were a team. So we found we go by a train and get down at a small town called Jharsuguda, and then from there we take another train, or if you are in a hurry, take a taxi, and you reach a place called Sambalpur. And then from Sambalpur, you reach the one of the ghats on the Mahanadi River, and both Khundmals was on the other side of the river. And when I say Mahanadi River, as the name implies, it's a huge river. It's almost like, if you're standing on one bank, you can barely see the other bank. So we hired a car, and then we went to the ghat, and then there was this ferry. We were told that there is a ferry. So the ferry turned out to be a huge raft, actually. And we drove our car onto the raft, and then we crossed the river. And then again, we started driving towards this town called Baudh. Completely, it was a, deserted area. We were going through very sparse forests. Finally, we reached the town of Baudh. And there, of course, we were met by the local office of the All India Radio, who had been alerted that we were coming. And they were very happy to see us because apparently they felt also very isolated in that small town. So they took us around the town. You could circumnavigate the town within about half an hour. That was the size of the town. And then we said that, look, we're going to put up these TV sets and so forth for the rural population. And where are these located? So they gave a big laugh. And they said, there's no rural population here. This is a completely tribal area. And then you have these small pockets of tribals. There's no electricity. So you can't run your TV sets over there. And so if you're looking for putting the TV sets over here, you better put battery operated sets. So was one of my experiences in the depths of rural India, so to speak. And then I remember when, again, I think in 74, I had been, because I was working in the rural context, so I was put in charge of something called the deployment operations and maintenance. We had to deploy 2,400 direct reception sets in 2,400 villages, and these were pretty backward villages, chosen specifically so because they wanted to study the impact of a learning medium like television on these kind of populations. And the satellite we were going to use was ATS-6, at that time ATSF. The NASA way of doing things is to call it, give it alpha numbers, and then once you launch it, it go numeric. So it was application technology satellite F, which then became ATS-6 once it was launched. So ATS-6 had been launched already, and it was stationed over the United States, and it was being used to broadcast health education and technology programs in the US as well as Canada. Now, it would be actually, for India's use, it would be actually shifted eastward and stationed somewhere over East Africa, from where we could see the satellite. From where the one of the NASA stations located in the UK could also see the satellite, because the satellite had to be under their control. So the problem was that we had the satellite only for a year. So that meant that the satellite would be given to us somewhere around August 10th, and would be taken away by about 15th of August next year. So August 10th, 1975 to August 15, 1976. That was the period. And naturally, if you want to cover 2,400 villages in remote areas, you have to be able to have everything ready by the time the satellite comes. Okay. Now the problem was, we have this all this direct reception sets, antennas, TV sets, everything made. How do we test it? We tested in the lab. Everything is fine. How to test it with the real satellite? So the idea was that a team of us would go to NASA. We were to go to the Goddard Space Flight Center in near Washington, and we would set up our unit over there, test it out with the live satellite, and once the test results were satisfactory, we could say that the project could immediately start. So 74, I think around July or August, four of us, two of us, in fact, three of us had already gone previously, because they were in the Earth station business, and they were already located in a place called Rosman, where the main Earth station for controlling the satellite was. And we, two of us, we followed with the rest of the equipment, which was two antennas, and these antennae were 10-foot diameter dishes, which had been, disassembled and packed in two chests, two huge packing cases, two TV receivers, and a few spares and things like that. So with all this, this was sent ahead of us and had reached Washington and had been collected by GSFC and kept in a warehouse. We reached there, and then we were supposed to, open up the packages. And so the packages came very well. There was no damage at all. Both the TV sets were perfectly all right, tested out okay. Antenna had to be assembled, and so there were five of us, two of us and three earlier people. So we all got down to erecting the antenna. And the problem was that these are mounted on the ground, and it was a tripod. So you had to dig for each antenna. You had to dig 3 holes about 2 feet deep, push the transponder, the tripod in, and then of course fix it up, and then mount the reflector, and then point the reflector and all that. So we found that our NASA hosts were in a bit of a how do we dig those holes? So first, of course, we had to get permission from the people to dig the holes. That was done. That's not a problem. It was on the side of the building, and I don't remember the building number, but there were a lot of antennas there, because a lot of this kind of work was going on. So we were given a place for our 2 antennas. So now the problem was how to dig the holes. So finally, one of us, I remember, he said, "Can we get a shovel?" So there was what kind of, this is just an ordinary shovel, you used to dig. So they said, yeah, I have one. One of them said, I have one in my car boot. So he brought the shovel, and we got down to actually digging those holes. And those guys were very surprised. And then from then on, we were known as the Mad Indians. So we dug those holes, put in the tripod, and then we had developed a method of pointing the antenna in a blind fashion, because obviously back in India there was no time to point the antenna after the satellite came. So we had developed this method. So we used the method and pointed the antenna, and lo and behold, every other antenna was looking this way, ours was looking this way. So is our method wrong? We again went through the whole skin. No, there's nothing wrong. Then suddenly those, Jack Miller, he was actually the person who was handling the project from NASA's end. He just hit his head and said, Arup, come with me. So we went back into his cabin, and then he did something on the computer, and then he handed me another set of, what do you call, azimuth and elevation angles for the satellite from that location. And so this time when we used it, we got perfect alignment. Later on, I found out that instead of giving us the azimuth angle and elevation angle of the satellite from that location, he had given us the sub-satellite point of the satellite. So naturally, we looked in the wrong place. So that was fine. And then, of course, we had to test it with the satellite. And the satellite was pretty busy. Everybody was using it. So we got the time at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we went back. We were staying in a small apartment. We went back. And then at 1:30, we called up the taxi service, and we piled into the taxi, came to NASA and GSFC to the lab. And two of the NASA engineers were also there. And the satellite we were given permission to start receiving satellite signals. And so we just switched on the system, and there was this spectrum analyzer connected to the output. And then pip, you got the signal. So that was one great this thing. We didn't even have to adjust the antenna, although we did try, but this thing was fantastic, spot on. But the problem that then we realized was that the signal that was coming was 20 dB below what was expected, and that was not good. So what could be the problem? So first, they said that maybe we are not transmitting. They have to transmit, so they are not transmitting the full power. So they pushed up the power. We had a small increase in the blip, but nothing more. So anyway, by that time it was, I think, 3 or 4 in the morning. So we said, okay, well, we'll think about it later why this is happening. And meanwhile, my boss from SAC, this none other than Pramod Kale. So Pramod Kale called me up and said, what's happening? So I said, yeah, we have set up the antennas, we have set up everything. Yesterday we tested with the with the satellite. We got the signal, but the problem is signal is coming 20 dB down. He says, what kind of helix are you using? This was, circularly polarized signal. So I said, this is, we are given to understand this is right circular polarization. He said, yes, it's right circular polarization from the satellite. So right circular polarization on a satellite will look like a left circular polarization from your end. So what is the helix you are using? So I said, okay, I'll get back and immediately check. So I went and looked, and it was also a right circular polarized thing. So immediately he called up the antenna manufacturer, this is ECIL, told them to halt all production, that antenna helix has to be changed. So with that very first test, we could find out a problem, and that saved us a huge amount of money, because we were going to make something like 3,000 antennas. We had made already about 200, but the rest of the 2,000 odd, the feed was corrected. So that was one experience. And then, of course, we went through a whole lot of testing and everything. That was great fun. Went through with flying colors. And then after the whole thing was over, we were very relaxed. And I think we were all having a cup of coffee. And Jack Miller calls me to his office. When are you going back? I said, I'm supposed to go back in a couple of days. You're not going back. What is that? So he said, no, you write a report. I want to see a report. of all that what you have done, all the difficulties you have faced, all the corrections you have done, only then I'll let you go. If required, you will extend your stay. And I'll talk to Kale and tell him. So, I had to sit back, stay back and write the whole report. It was almost a 200, 300 page report. But the interesting thing was that was a fantastic grounding for me, because then I realized that any work that you do, unless you complete documentation, it all gets lost. And this is a lesson that I carried with me right through my career. So this was one of those great things that happened. And then, of course, we came back to India, and we started on site. And then again, we had a lot of interesting experiences. One of the experiences that we had was, we had to do this kind of village selection. Because, we had to almost go through something like about 10,000 villages before we could select those 2,400 which we would use. So we used to take a lot of parameters, distance from the road, whether it's a motorable road, or what is the population size, because the social analysis people wanted population size and male-female ratio, number of children, because there used to be a children program also. All this kind of data was being collected. And for us, it was the approachability, and then the availability of electric power, and the location where we want to put it. We selected the school. But in many places, we found a school building was totally decrepit, and it had to be repaired and things like that. So this was going on, and I think I was there in Bihar. And suddenly the person who was in charge of the Bihar cluster, he was one CL Roy. So he called me and said, I was sitting there with the people, and then he said, "Sir, please come." So we all got, then he said, "No, others, no, only you should come." I said, "Okay, fine." So we went, and then there was this guy there, village contingent sitting there. They said, "Why is our village not selected?" It was a tricky situation. He said, "Our village is this and our village is that." No, it was really a very well-developed village. So, and therefore it was not selected, right? Unfortunately, a neighboring village was selected, which was not so well developed. So how could you select that undeveloped village and not us? So our excuse was, it's done by computer selection. So, they said, "We don't believe in all this computer and all this stuff. You better select our village." So I said, "Okay, we'll see, because it's not in my hand. This work is being done back in Ahmedabad. So I'll go and tell them of this thing." And I noted down the name of the village, etc. Then he said, "Okay, fine. But if you don't, we'll go to that village, pick up all your TV and everything, and bring it in our village." So, this is the kind of situation that is there on the ground. So this was one. Then another time, this time the installation work was going on. I had gone to check and all. And then we went to one village, and there was this farmer who was absolutely sitting tight on a small plot of land next to the school building. And the people, my team was actually putting up an antenna on the roof. Now, this is a gabled roof, so you can't put an antenna on the roof, so it has to be fixed on a pole on the wall, and then the reflector has to be put, which is not exactly what we would have liked, but we were doing that. So then I said, "Why are you doing this? Why don't you put it on the ground?" So he said, do you see that man sitting there?" I said, "Yeah, he is the owner of that plot. And for him, if I put the antenna there, he can't use that plot for 1 year. So he is not going to allow us to put it there." So, these are kind of non-technical issues which affect us in technical ways. A very interesting episode was relating to the maintenance. Now, the rule was, this is a completely modular set. So the rule was, if a problem is reported, you go to the village, you see what's the problem, and pull out the offending module, put in a fresh module, check if the TV is working, and then you come back with the non-functional module. And then this had to be sent to the cluster headquarters, as we called it. So, like, in Bihar, Muzaffarpur was the cluster headquarters. In Rajasthan, Jaipur was the cluster headquarters, and so forth. So, and in these headquarters, the ECIL, because the TV sets were made by ECIL, so ECIL had stationed a team. and then they would receive the defective units, repair it, and then again put it back into circulation. Suddenly, I got a call from the ECIL chap in Darbhanga, in Muzaffarpur. So he said that there is a huge problem. What's the problem? He says, whatever I am getting from the Darbhanga town, they have multiple problems. How can a single card have so many problems? So I said, okay, I'll try and find out. So what I found was very interesting. This chap who was stationed in Darbhanga, he had obviously plenty of time on his hands, and he was a bit of a electronics nut. So what he was doing was he would use his multimeter. In fact, he had no other instruments except a multimeter. He would use the multimeter and find out which are the devices which have gone. He would pull them out. He would take the good devices from the spare card, put it there. And then what he would do was that bad device he would again put back in the other card. And he would go on doing this till one card would have maybe 4 or 5 faulty devices. And then he would send it to the... So, so finally this was solved. So then we had to tell him that, look, the NIC, I mean the ESL chap told him, you're doing a great job. Only one request to you is, please don't solder the bad units back into the card. Just leave them so we know that this is what has to be replaced. So, we had these kind of interesting events also happening. And after we finished in 75, 75 August or so, site was over. And I was at a loose end, what to do. And then Professor Yashpal calls me, he was the director. So he called me and he says, what are you going to do? I said, you tell me. I mean, I'm right now working on the next project. There's another project called Satellite Telecommunication Experiments Project. And I was going to develop a voice-activated transmission system there. So I said, this is what I'm doing. You like it? I said, it's okay. He says, no, I want you to do something else. I said, what? You go into the remote sensing area. No, I fell from the sky. I said, sir, I'm a communication engineer. What do I know of remote sensing? And, solve high-level science and so forth. So he says, all that is fine. But what we need is a connectivity to the ground. And we need a person who can convey what is being done in remote sensing to the people on the ground so that they appreciate what's happening. And you have that experience because you've worked in site in rural areas and so forth. So why don't you take it up? So that's how I got into remote sensing. Not into any of the nitty-gritty of remote sensing, but more in terms of acting as a communications channel between the scientists who are working on the various applications and the people who are ultimately would be using those applications. That's how we started. And there again, I remember one very interesting incident which happened is at that time one of the groups in remote sensing was actually working on land use mapping, and they were using aerial photographs, and they were doing this project. They did in several areas, but the nearest one they were doing was in place called Godhra. So we were to visit. They were to visit the collector. They asked me, "Would you like to come have a look at the things?" So I said, "Fine, let's go." So we went to Godhra, and there we met with the district collector, and then this team was already explaining to him what has been done and so forth, and they were making these nice tables which shows that for every district, how much of area was under what crop and things like that. And this gentleman was saying, yes, but I would like to know where these are. I would like to know where these are. And I found the team was not understanding that at all. So then I intervened and I said, look, I think what he is really looking for is a map. He's not looking for statistics. And then this gentleman, he said, yes, Mr. Dasgupta, you're right. I want a map. If you say that there is a particular area under, let's say, groundnut crop, I want to know where is it. The statistics I always get. But where is that? Which are the fields which are having this particular crop? That is what I want. So actually, with just that one intervention, we shifted the whole activity from statistics to more of mapping and thematic mapping. There I had a lot of interesting things there. Once we had got to Kerala, we wanted to do a project for the Idiki river area. So we had the forest officer with us, the chief conservator of forest, and we had the I think the chief soil survey officer too. And we were two of us, Baldev Sai and myself, and we went all the way to up and down. There's something called the main central road, right? So we would take the main central road and drove all the way from Trivandrum right up to Idiki and back. And it was a really wonderful. It was supposed to be a field trip, so we collected a lot of information. But other than that, it was really great. And we went to Thekadi, and we could see the elephants and things like that. So that was the bonus kind of thing for the work that we did. Then, of course, that went through very nicely, and what else do we do is that then when I looked at this whole issue of the mapping, then I realized that remote sensing gives us beautiful maps. Fine, people are also very happy with those maps. Fine, but the problem is, how do they use those maps, right? So then I found that, for example, if you want to interpret those imagery, the first thing that you need is a ground truth. And for ground truth, what these people would do is they would take the imagery, mark the area which they had a doubt, and actually go to the field, collect that information, and then finalize their thematic details. So I said that, why don't we look at something which is digital? All this work was being done analog. I said, why don't we look at digital maps? And we look at how to organize all the other data in a digital environment. And that's where I started reading up on GIS and so forth. And I had two colleagues with me at that time, so they were also doing a lot of reading. And then I persuaded my boss at that time was Professor P.D. Bhavsar. So I persuaded him, sir, why don't we get a GIS and start working on it on an experimental basis? And Professor Bhavsar was a very kind of encouraging kind of person. He said, yeah, go ahead. And so we started looking out which was the one, and then finally one of my colleagues studied the whole thing and said, sir, let's go for SRI, Arc and Arc Info. How to get Arc Info. So now here is where serendipity works. I was going to Calcutta on some work, and in those days you didn't have a direct flight, so you had to go to Bombay and stay overnight, and then morning you catch a flight to Calcutta. And sitting next to me was a chap whom I had worked with long time ago, and he was actually from IBM. And at that time, IBM had been driven out. This is roughly, I'm telling you, around 77 and so forth. So IBM had been pushed out of India, and a lot of the IBM staff had actually come together and formed another company. They called IDM, International Data Machines. And this guy was working with that company, and we had been working on buying some desktop computers. So I just met him and we got chit chatting, and then then I said, he asked me, what are you doing? I said I was kind of looking at these kind of GIS kind of things. Then he said, that's interesting because we are doing it. So I fell from the sky. I said, great. Well, what are you doing? He says, no, we are working in the Santa Cruz export promotion zone, and we are doing a lot of digitization work for offshore clients, and we are using ArcInfo. So I said, can we go and have a look at it? He said, I don't know because it's a export oriented zone, so visitors are not allowed, but I'll see what I can do. So let me get back and then get back to you. So fine, we parted. And then he called me and said, yes, we can. So, but they should come absolutely clean, and they will go out absolutely clean. You're not even allowed to bring in or take out a piece of paper. So fine with that, again, two of my colleagues, they went off to Bombay, and they came back with stars in their eyes. They said, sir, this is what we need. So I said, how to buy it? So again, I called this chap and said, look, are you guys going to market this in India? He said, frankly, I don't think there's a market in India. I said, look, at least you have one customer. So, so why don't you market this? So he said, yeah, let me see. So he put me in touch with the S3 people in Redlands, California. So we were kind of, I mean, there was no email and things like that at that time. So we used all by letter and telephone. So they sent a person. He came down and he discussed with us, and he said, "Yeah, yes, what work you want to do, you can use ArcInfo. But then now, you have to have a data general machine." I said, "We don't use data general, we use VAX." So he said, "I'll go back and let you know." So he went back, and then he wrote back to me saying that, yeah, we can install it in a VAX as well. I said, fine. So how to place the order? And in those days, mind you, there was this Department of Electronics kind of thing. So anything related to computers, software, and so forth, you had to canalize it through them. So we're just going about that when suddenly this chap again telephones me, and he says, Mr. Dasgupta, there is news for you. What is that? He said, we are being taken over by a company called Hindustan Computers. But they are also taking over the ArcInfo business, and they are most likely going to market it. Again, this is good news. So immediately again, because I knew a lot of people in HCL, right? Because we had bought computers from them, and we were working with them on an image processing system as well. So again, I called up my contacts in HCL and said, "This is this is going to happen." So he said, "I don't know. I was hearing about it," but then he came back to me and said, "Yes, this is what happened." But HCL is not buying it. It's being bought over. It's being a partnership is being built up between S3 and a sister company of HCL called NIIT, and essentially that's an educational kind of thing. So I said, "I don't care who, I want to buy it." And so then again this whole thing started, and then finally by that time, of course, the rest of people in ISRO also were very keen. They said, we want it. So I said, okay, let's then buy in bulk, right? So we bought, I think, some like 10-15 licenses. I think three or four licenses in SAC, another 3-4 in NRSA, and then we had these regional remote sensing service centers. So 5 of them. So each of them again we gave 3-4. So 5, 6, 7, almost 20-25 licenses we bought. And that's how we got into GIS. And then of course we started putting together a lot of stuff on the GIS. And then that is the time, somewhere around 1983, this whole idea of a national natural resources management system got mooted. Professor Dhawan and Professor M.G.K. Menon, at that time he was Secretary DST. So they mooted this idea, let's get together and do something like this. And I was rooting for something called a Natural Resources Information System, NRIS, and DST was doing an NRDMS, Natural Resources Data Management System. Of course, they were going totally indigenous. So they were starting with the development of the GIS itself. CSRE in Bombay, one lady, I forget her name, she was pushing that. So they went that route, we went the ArcInfo route, and we started off a pilot project. We got together the stuff, and it was made. And then, of course, the whole idea was to then put all over India. But then somehow or other it got stopped. I don't know why. What happened? Some thinking in headquarters maybe. So I felt very dejected, and I said, okay, this is it. So on my file I wrote NRIS, RIP, and put it in my bottom drawer. But then suddenly again it got revived, because one of the person who was working with me, he had by then he had been transferred to headquarters. So he again started pushing this, and then so the whole thing got revived. And then we went in for a large project, almost all India project. We covered each and every state. We involved the state remote sensing centers, and that's how the NRS project got done. And today, much of the work that we did is now available on a system called vedas, okay, which was basically started with the base data we had created in NRIS, and of course they've now added a lot of stuff to it. So you won't recognize the NRIS as such. But NRIS was the starting point, so to speak. And then, of course, we got involved in the one of the things that I would like to talk about, and Sudarshan also talked about it, was the impact of sanctions, right? So when we started the NRS project, at that time we were basically we were in the workstation mode. So we were using Silicon Graphics and SRE software, of course, and the sanctions hit us. In fact, this was for the pilot, right? And after the pilot, we decided to go for the PC based stuff, because SRE also had by then shifted from the workstations and minis to PCs. In fact, I had gone to their user conference in 2000, I think, or 1999, because they gave us an award for innovative use of GIS. They're arguing for GIS for information system for development purposes, and I was supposed to go and collect the award. So there I met a lot of the people I knew, and there was one person there. He's written a book also. Anyway, I since I knew him from before, so I started chatting with him, and he said, "You attend my lecture." I said, "Fine." So that lecture, he showed that they were shifting over to Windows NT. So that was news to me. So afterwards, I went and I was goggle-eyed, and I went and told him, "What is this?" So he said, "That's why I told you to attend my lecture. We are leaving workstations, we are leaving mainframes, we are leaving minis, we are going to work on Windows NT." So I came back, and then that is the time when we are discussing about the NRIS being, scaled up to an all India level. And so I said, "Look, we just have to change the entire track, because now it's all PCs." In a sense, that was very good, because workstations were pretty expensive. And one of the difficulties that I was facing was, how are I going to buy so many workstations? So once it became a PC-based thing, it was, of course, those PCs were pretty heavy PCs, so they were not all that cheap. But nevertheless, it was an order of magnitude cheaper, so my budget could be much better. And then, of course, we could buy huge amount of licenses, so we could negotiate with the SRE to bring down the cost. I mean, it was brought down in figures which I was told, "Please don't tell these figures to anybody," that kind of stuff. They really came down. And this is when the sanctions hit. And SRE said, we can't sell to you. So what to do? So then a wire media was found that we would place an order, but on behalf of the end users. And SRE would deliver to the end users. But we would act as kind of, validators and things like that. So using that, we were able to finally get the systems and get the project going. But there was another sad story. We were working on Silicon Graphics, and by that time, of course, once we went into NRIS at that time, because I was also at that time heading the image processing group. So a lot of heavy processing work was there, and again, there was a demand for a lot of workstations, powerful workstations, and again, we selected Silicon Graphics. Suddenly, I get a call from a Silicon Graphics man in India, and he says, "Mr. Dasgupta, please hear me out." So I said, "What's happened?" He said that there has been a problem with the US, and they are suspecting all these workstations you have purchased are being used for military purposes. I said, I fell from the skies. I said, "Look, I mean, we are, we are civilians, and we working on our Indian remote sensing satellites are not used by the military, and we are only doing the data processing part of it." So he said, "No, but I'll explain to you." So he came over, and then he said what had happened. See, this was a very silly thing to happen. See, whenever we had to order any of these things, we had to actually give a justification note, right? Now, our friends in Trivandrum, they also wanted the same workstation. So their purchase department got in touch with our purchase department. How did you get this? Because it was refused to them. And our purchase, that chap, he just took a copy of my justification and he passed it on to them. At least he could have told them that, don't just blind copy it. This guy, what he did was he blind copied it and attached it. Now, this guy in the US, it rang a bell. ISRO, same workstation from two centers, and he brings the two together and he sees the justification is the same. So, Trivandrum was in trouble. We were in trouble. So this finally, they said, we'll bring that person. You explain to him. So the guy came and he was very dodgy. He was feeling very this thing. So I said, yeah, what is it that you want to know? No, I want to see your machine. I said, I'm sorry. I can't allow you to enter my laboratory unless I know why. Because our rule is if it's a foreigner and a foreigner has to be taken to the laboratory, I have to get prior permission. So you can't enter my lab. But tell me what is the problem? He said, you're using it for military purposes. I said, no. And you have to take my word for it. We are a civilian organization. We used your system for NRS kind of work. I showed him some of the stuff that we had done. And then right now we are using it for data processing for our IRS satellites. So there's no military use there. It's a civilian satellite. It was very difficult to convince him. And this Indian fellow, he was absolutely shivering. Then he took me aside and said, sir, you please do something and let him have a look at it. Otherwise, my job is at stake. I said, okay. So then I called up my director. I said, sir, this is what has happened. And what do you want me to do? So he said that, okay, you have him accompanied by somebody all the time. And he should not take anything. No notes, no recording, nothing. So I said, okay, fine. With these conditions, I said, okay, you come. I'll take you. But you will go only to that machine. You will see what is there. It will be shown to you by the people concerned. And you are going to come back and I'll be with you every step of the way. So he did that. He satisfied himself that there was nothing there. But it meant nothing because we were under sanctions that never got lifted. And one of the things that came out of that was very interesting. We were also at that time going to be working on the data processing system for the radar SAR satellites, and we were in agreement. We were in agreement with DLR now, for the use of the ERS data. So NRC was actually developing the system for reception of the ERS data, and we were to develop the data processing part. And we needed a high performance computer, but again, high performance computers were not allowed. We came to know from CDAC, who was in Pune, that they were working on a high performance computer. One Bhaskara was there at that time. So we talked on the phone and he said, yeah, we can work together. I said, fine. So they were using something called a transputer. Transputer is basically a computer processor with 4 communication ports. So you could link them in any way into a mesh structure, ladder, whatever. And you could then do parallel processing. So we worked on that and we were able to develop a parallel processor for the SAR data, the ERS1 SAR data. In fact, CDAC got an award for that because that was considered to be the most innovative use of the transputer system. Param, they used to call it. And then we had to buy one Param from them, and that was located in NRC for the ERS data processing. So in a sense, what happened was that the sanctions also helped us to find a lot of other ways of getting the same job done. And in the end, I don't think the sanctions helped the US very much. In fact, they actually harmed them. Because if you remember, there was another famous high performance computing computer company. I have forgotten the name now. They had a computer in the National Center for Medium Wave Weather Forecasting in Delhi, Noida. And I believe there was a chap sitting there at the gate, yes, from the US embassy, and he would check each and every piece of paper that was going in or coming out to ensure that there was no other work being done except for the meteorological modeling. And this company then went belly up, because what happened was they had set apart quite a few computers for sale to countries like India, where they was under sanctions, but they could never make the sales because by that time India had moved far ahead onto high performance computing. So these are some of the memories that I have. Uh, we did a lot of work with a lot of other agencies, DST, for example. We were participants in the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, but somehow or other that never really took off the way it should have. It's still rolling along. And now I think with the new geospatial policy that has come, things are going to be very different. We always faced a lot of problem with the new geospatial policy, with the old geospatial policy. Restrictions on aerial photography, restrictions on satellite data. You could even our 5 meter data was under, we couldn't share with anybody. And so I believe that now these things are going to change after many, many, many years. Well, it'll change, I guess. Maybe in my lifetime, I hope. Okay, so that's all I have to say.